Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Log Cabin Stitcher. Welcome to my channel. I have something fun planned for you. I was able to do a fun quilt talk with my friend's elementary school art class, and they were learning about quilts, and I had told her if I could have a chance to come and talk to the kids, show them quilts, let them touch them, let them experience them and learn a little bit more about them, I would love to do that. So I got a call and I did that in December. So I have had these quilts sitting, waiting for me to do this because I want to do it and really help you experience what these little kids got to see. So I'm going to have you pretend you're in first grade. Pretend you're sitting on the floor with a bunch of your other friends in the class, and just know that you just get to relax. You get to hear some stories, see some fun quilts, and hopefully I get to engage you. That was my goal with these kids. Over my life, I've had a lot of different hobbies. And one time I got to go and do some classroom events with a friend's elementary school. It was with me as a gardener. So I had a darling little bucket that I could take with me, and it was a fairy garden. So I would take that and let the kids get to see it and look at these little miniature, beautiful flowers in a darting setting and get to experience that and touch it. And the kids would be sitting around me, and one time, and then I would read a garden book, a kid's garden book to them. And one time I was doing it and the kids were sitting all around me, and it was summertime, or it was warm. So I had sandals on, and at that time I had a toe ring, and I could see as I'm trying to read, I saw this little girl just creep a little bit closer and a little bit closer to me. And then she started playing with my toe ring. And it was so hilarious. So I really like talking to kids and engaging with them because I'm like a kid at heart. So I'm not going to stop this unless I have a coughing fit. I'm getting over having a cold. So I had started and had a huge coughing fit. We're just going to do it. I've tried to put everything out so it will prompt me to talk, but I'm just going to do this on the seat of my pants and just try to reenact what I did when I had these kids, because it was so much easier being goofy and doing this presentation when all these kids were there. They're asking questions, and I would ask them questions, and they would raise their hands, and they were like all over the place, and it just got my energy going, and it was just so fun to do that. So I'm going to try to get into that mindset that I'm not just looking at a camera, but I'm looking at a bunch of squirrely kids, and they had a great time and I had a great time. So are you ready? Are you excited? And I won't be able to see you raise your hand, so we're just going to have to pretend. So here you go. So I wanted the kids to see. So, okay, well, no, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do it as if there was a bunch of kids in front of me. So we're going to do this. And I am going to get into the mode and just do it and have fun. Let me get a drink. So I'm going to go from Bonnie Log Cabin Stitcher, who does videos, to older ladies that like to watch me. That's primarily what I have. So I know I've got a whole different audience, but instead of that, we're going to pretend that you're all in first grade. So that would be 6 or 7 or 8. So let's have fun. So I'm going to have a drink. And I hope I don't start coughing. And here we go. Boom, here we go. So hi guys, I'm Bonnie, and I wanted to share with you all about my love of quilting, stories that I have, and I want to help you get excited about what quilts have been in the past and what they could be in the future, and answer some of your questions and let you touch the quilts and let you experience them. So are you guys ready? So the very first thing I wanted to show you is quilts have had a long history. And I have always loved old things. My mom loved old things. So this is a piece of a very old quilt, and I wanted you guys to see how it is with people that did stitching by hand and put these together. So they would stitch the pieces together, but they would also stitch all the layers together. And it would be a quilt that's either thin and nice and light, or a quilt that's thick. And you can see this is called batting. So most quilts had a backing and the front, but the center of it was called batting. And that's sometimes nice and thick or nice and thin, but it makes it where it's either very warm or nice and light. So those are just some old pieces that you get to see. Then sometimes people did what's called tying. So they would make a quilt and they would just tie it together with yarn or thread and a little knot. But isn't this one funny? I wanted to show you guys today because it looks like a little porcupine. So this block is called a double wedding ring because of the ring. So why do you think it's called that? Look at that wedding ring. Now this is an old wedding ring. This is actually my grandmother's wedding ring. So she got married in the 1920s. That was over 100 years ago. So wedding ring. And this quilt is probably from like the 1920s, 1930s. So that's 100 years old. Do you guys know anyone that's 100 years old? What's the oldest person you know? How old are your grandma and grandpas? So they may have had a quilt like this too. So this one was given to me by a friend, and I got to keep it for him because he decided it was time to pass it along to somebody else. So that's a fun old quilt. Now, one of the first quilts that I got was this one. It is a very old quilt too, and there's parts that are falling apart, but I love it because I love the fabrics and I also love the memories. So I got married when I was young. I was 19 when I got married, and my grandparents had an attic up above their house, and it was full of treasures, old treasures, but sometimes they hadn't always been taken care of. So I can remember going with my mother and my grandma, and there was narrow steps going up to this attic. And I knew that there was treasures up there because I had been in that attic all my life checking things out. So I wanted to set up my first little tiny house. And when we got married, we only had this little teeny tiny house to live in, but I wanted some treasures. So mom and grandma and I went up the stairs, and I was creeping up the stairs, not sure what I was going to find up there. But some of the treasures, see these baskets right there. I got one, two, and the third basket down there. They're old picnic baskets. So what did I find up there besides the picnic baskets? I found this treasure, and parts of it are stained, so I just fold it so I hold the beautiful pieces, but it's very, very soft, and it was quilted by hand. So you can see that. You can see the soft colors and the soft fabric. So that's something that I had. And then I went, after I got married, I would go to something called estate sales, and then you could find treasures that were older. And this, look at that. Even though it's falling apart, I love it because I think this was done in like the 1940s. This is something that was a mattress pad. So under your sheets, between your mattress and your sheets, there's something called a mattress pad. And there was a magazine article that I found that was showing people how to take that mattress pad and make it into a bath mat. So this may have been a bath mat. It's so faded that you can hardly see this, but I bought this as a young woman, and I have had it for many, many years, and it's one of my treasures. Then I went to a swap meet, and I went with some friends, and it was so fun. My husband and I were looking around, and I found another old treasure. So this is an older quilt, and it has fun little fabrics. And these fabrics were generally, I want to say, quite often they were done with feed sacks, and they were done around the 1930s. I don't always know the history, but I just know that I love it. And it is an old quilt. And it was the first time that I tried to buy something at a swap meet and tried to tried to get the price down a little bit. So it was only $35 at the time. And I tried to get them to take less money, and they said no. And I was so embarrassed because I was so young. And I went away and I told my husband about it. Or, yep, we were married by then. I told my husband about it, and he said, let's go back and let's go buy it. So that was fun, but it was my memory, and I love it that it has these fun old fabrics. So do you see anything on there? Like there's ships, or there's boats. They're not ships, there's boats, there's bunnies. There's all kinds of fun little fabrics, and I have some more like that too. Then quilts can have stories. That was something that you guys learned about from your teacher. Quilts can tell stories. So I have a quilt with a story. This one my mother made for me. She made this quilt for me, and by that time I had 2 children. One of them was 3 years old, and he wanted to be with his grandma because my mom didn't live in our same state, so she came out for a visit. He just wanted to be with his Granby, and she and I needed to talk about how we would put this quilt together. So at the door, as we were talking at the door, he was jiggling, 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 jiggling. He was persistent. So as Mom and I were talking, we heard this jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. Granby, jiggle, jiggle, jiggle. And do you know what? Even though the door was locked, he jiggled it enough that he came in, and it was so funny. But that's part of the story of this quilt even before it got put together. Then we have a little tiny log cabin up in the mountains, up with lots of birds and other animals. And this was hanging on the wall. And then one year there was a big fire that came around, and it was burning and burning the trees. It was burning lots of homes. And we were thinking that our cabin may have been burnt down. But even though the fire burned all around, our cabin survived. It did not burn down. A lot of the trees were all gone. But you know something else? Ours was a little tiny log cabin, and it was up off the ground. And some friends of ours, they had to leave fast because the fire was coming. They had to pack their car. They got their kids, they got their dogs, but they couldn't find their cat. So they had to leave their cat. Their house was burnt down. But do you know what? When they came back up and started checking on their cabin and clearing things up, their cat came back. And that's where they think, because our cabin survived and there was an opening under that cabin, so they think the kitty survived the fire because it came and lived under that cabin for a little while. So that's one of the stories of that quilt. My mom loved making quilts for my kids. So one year she came out and she had one quilt for each one of them. And this was the quilt. So this was for one of my sons, and he loved bugs. Then there was another one that was dinosaurs, because he liked dinosaurs. So fabrics can have fun designs on there. But can you tell what's different about this one? What do you think that this is for? It's a little pocket. What would that be for? It might be for something like this. Look at this. Quilts can be fun. They can have toys inside of them. So I got to tell you something. It was so fun when I was doing this talk. I threw the quilt down. I had the kids move out of the way. I threw the quilt down, and then I had a bag of toys, little puppets and little toys, and they had so much fun. They each got to put a toy in and take it out, and it was so much fun. It was so fun. So that's one of my quilts. Now, here's another one that tells a story. Now, that little log cabin was up, or is up in the mountains, and all around it, there's wild animals. One time, we have cameras that were watching, and at night, we could see things that moved around. And one night, there was 2 young mountain lions that came around, and they were there all night long. We were not there, and I was glad because I don't like mountain lions. They're pretty to watch, but they were playing like kittens. They were young, and they even jumped up right on one of them jumped up right on the front porch, and I thought, oh, am I going to be too scared to be on that front porch at night in the future because it might have a mountain lion around there? But we had a metal door. So when I was up there next time, when I would come out, before I would come out at night to take my little dog, who is barking right now, I would take him to go to the bathroom at night. And I didn't know it was out there because it was very, very dark. So I had that screen door, and I would go bang, 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 bang on that door. So it would hopefully scare away the animals. But the other thought I had was, do they just think that's a sound of a bell of feeding time, like at the zoo? So that was kind of scary sometimes at night. But at night, this is to represent what was outside my window at night. I had trees. There were still some trees that were left after the fire. There were trees right by our cabin. And then I would see the beautiful, beautiful moon. And then one time my husband was sitting outside at night watching the stars. He was laying down watching the stars, and he told me later he looked over, and then there was a little fox. There was a fox that didn't know he was there, and it came up really close to him. Then it saw him, and then it froze, and then it ran away. But that's to help remember that very fun time. And that's what the foxes in California looked like. They were kind of brown color. So that's one of my animal stories. But another story up at the cabin, we had one really tall tree that was by a walkway. Now this cabin was back in the woods, so there was not very many homes around there, not very many cars, so it was very quiet. And we had lots of birds, but we also could have bear. One time I woke up in the morning and Riley, that dog that was barking, was bark, 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 barking. And I opened my eyes, and a tree right outside my window had a bear in it. It was eating my bird seed, and it was perched. So here was a bear. It was probably a young bear, but it was pretty good size, and it was perched on a log that was only that big, a branch, not a log. It was a branch that big coming out of the tree, and that bear was able to perch there, and he had his breakfast while Riley was barking. But we also had deer. So we had beautiful deer. So this deer I put on to represent all the deer that were up there in the mountains. So one time, my husband and I were sitting out front, and we would just enjoy watching the birds coming to the bird feeders. And as I was actually stitching this on, because I stitched that on with my hands, with my fingers, I hand stitch this on. It's called applique. I was sitting there stitching this on there, and I look up, and the tree, the actual tree down the road that this was supposed to represent, I look down there, and there's a mother. She's called a doe, and her fawns coming behind her as I'm stitching this. And I told my husband, Kurt, look over there at the deer. And it was so wonderful. So those are very happy stories that I have for this quilt. So even though our little cabin next week won't belong to us anymore because we're selling it, but I can have this quilt, and I often hang it on my wall, and I look at it, and I remember the deer and the trees, and I remember the fox, and I remember looking out that window on moonlit nights and watching the moon travel across the treetops, and it makes me very, very happy. So that's how quilts can tell stories, but they can also carry our memories with us. So another fun memory is this quilt. So this quilt I started before I got married. So if I got married when I was 19, I must have started this when I was 18, and it was a brand new thing. I took a class and I learned how to make a quilt. So I made this whole quilt top, and then I got bored, and then I didn't put it together, and I had it sitting in a closet for about 20 years. And then my mother started to quilt. So I gave it to her, and I said, I'm not doing anything with this. So I'm going to give it to you and let you do something with it. So she did. And you know what else she did? Look at this. That says Bonnie. That's my name. This is my handprint. Let's see. It's this handprint. So she asked me, because I used to sew, and my first job when I was 16 was at a fabric store, and I bought lots of fabric, but I made clothes out of them. And so she asked me to send her a piece of fabric that made me happy. And I had made a summer dress out of this fabric, and I loved that dress. So that's another happy memory for me. I don't have the dress anymore, but I have this quilt. And then, because she worked on it too, she picked out some fabric. Let's find that handprint. All right, guys, where is that handprint? There we go. So her name was Barbara. And so this is her handprint. So that's so fun. She's not here anymore, but I have this, and that's a memory. Like, I can hold my mom's hand, even though she's not with me right now. Then, look at this. Sometimes we use a pattern that is from a book or something drawn out by somebody else. But my mom liked to do fun things. They had a cottonwood tree at one time. So she went around and collected leaves. Now, when they bought their house, they had this beautiful tree, but when they bought the house, it wasn't blooming. And they knew cottonwood trees out here make a big mess. It's like snow in the springtime. They big, tall, beautiful trees, but their seeds get released, and it's like white dust. It's like white puffballs. It's like snow. And sometimes when you're taking a walk, they're all over the place. So my dad said, no, I don't want to have a tree that's going to be a mess in my neighborhood. So they got it cut down. So my mom has the memory of that tree from the leaf. See how big the leaf is? From that cottonwood tree. So fun memories. She went around her yard, collected leaves, and made patterns with all those leaves. Leaves all the way around. So that for me is a very fun quilt memory. And another thing about quilts is the people that have made them for you, even if you can't be with them, you can put that quilt around you. So this is what I do sometimes. I'll be missing my mom, and I'll wrap this quilt around me. And what do you think? Does it feel like a hug? Ooh, Mom can squeeze me tight and hold me. And that's because of the quilt. So that's a fun thing. Now, she loved her leaves. And then in the fall, whoops, she went around, she called me one time and she said, I went around for a walk in my neighborhood and I collected leaves that I'm going to use for a pattern for a new quilt. And this is that quilt. So this is a fun one too. Those are bright fall colored leaves. So these were the colors that they were. So the real leaf was this color. She chose fabric and she put the leaves in there. So this one has fun fabric. My mom loved fun fabric. So all of these is a different fabric and they look like something from the fall. Look at that one. That's Indian corn. So she hand stitched on this to put it together. So remember, the backing of the quilt has a nice thin batting in the middle so it's not too heavy, and then the front, and then she stitched it together and she stitched it. Doesn't that look like a real leaf? Like if you go outside and look at the leaves, these are called veins, the veins of the leaves. So very fun. And then she even stitched the outline of leaves in what's called the border. So another fun quilt that I have. Now, I did one. So this is one of my quilts that I made, and it has a snail on it. What do you think? Do you guys know what snails are like? Now, out here in Colorado, there's not really snails. So I had to explain to the kids what snails were. So they've got the shell on the outside, but the body of the snail, it can hide inside, but the body of the snail is slimy and squishy. So why would I have a snail on my quilt? So I spread this out for all the kids to see, and I put it on the ground and they got to find the snail. And then they found a lot of other fun things too. So let's see, guys, if we can find the snail. So we've got acorns and leaves. We've got bees. Oh, I see the snail. Do you guys see it? So there's the snail. It's not slimy. It's just fun. So I can have a snail on that quilt and not let it make a mess. What other animals are here? What other insects are here? There's also a dragonfly. Let's see. We've got a bird. Where's my dragonfly? There it is. I think there's two of them. That's my dragonfly. Isn't that fun? Okay, now I like to have fun with my quilts. So most of the time I like kind of darker colors, and sometimes I'll just do straight stitches. I always do this when I talk about how I hand quilt. That means with my hand, I'm making those, the backing, the front, and the middle. That's called a quilt sandwich. I hand stitch, so I always go like this. Does that look like a fish? Does that look like a bird? I did something I called squircles. Have you guys heard of a squircle? It's a square that's kind of like a circle, but this is what I call a squircle. So I drew these and then I stitched them. But is that fun? Is that a fun shape? And then I let the kids trace the shape with their fingers. I just love when kids get to touch quilts. I love when adults get to touch quilts. When I go to my quilt meetings, people like to look at them and I say, touch them, because you get to feel that stitching feels so fun. And then I think my quilt gets even more special when people who love them touch them. So I have another fun quilt to look at. It's kind of crazy colors because usually I like dark colors, but I did one that's bright. Are you ready? All right, this one is bright. It's so bright, I don't work on it very often because it scares me with all the bright colors. But I like to do fun stitching on there. So I like to match the stitching, and that's kind of different than the other ones. It just has the up and down, up and down. But this one has X's and little knots. And then one of them looks like a bug. Let's see if we can find it. Can you guys find it? Let's see. Here we go. Doesn't that look like a bug? Isn't that funny? So I can have all kinds of fun with my quilts. Now, my mom had fun too. So when she knew that she wouldn't be here too much longer, she made some quilts for me to save and give to her future great-grandchildren. So there's none that she would have had, so I still have one of those quilts. So this one was going to be for my son's children. So right now I'm hanging on to it, but look at that. So sometimes the stitching can really show up bright, 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 bright. Is that nice? What do you think this holiday is for? Right, it's for 4th of July. So he loves patriotic colors. So isn't that pretty? Where we've got red, white from the background, and blue. Fun stitching. That's kind of exciting, isn't it? Now, then this is another quilt my mom made me. My mom made me lots of quilts because she loved to make them, and she knew that I loved to have them. So she stitched this. So see, there's fun stitching. She did it with her hands. So some lines go here and they kind of, you can't see them too much. But other times, this one is called embroidery. Now, some of these fabrics are newer and some of them were really old. But the special thing about this little quilt is a pocket. So here's a little pocket in the back of the quilt. So she made a pocket and she put, look at, there's stuff in there. What's in there? Isn't it fun when you find a letter from somebody, especially somebody that you just love, and you find a fun letter from them? Then you can read it over and over. So let's see. There's a letter in here to me from my mom. Isn't that cool? Look at this. She put little notes in a letter and pieces of the very old fabric. That's very old. Let's see. There's the front of it. So there we go. It says Mom, XOX. Oh, and you know what else it says? What's that name? It says Beanie Bonjamer. Who's that? I told you my name was Bonnie, didn't I? Well, my dad liked to be silly, like me and my mom, and he made a nickname for me. Do you guys have nicknames? I had one, and it was Beanie Bonjamer. He even made up a song, and he would sing it, and it would embarrass me so much when I was young. So he would do it because he would know. And then now I love the song, and I love the name Beanie Bonjamer. So that's my special pocket. Now, lots of blocks have fun names. So some blocks, remember I showed you the wedding ring? Whoops, there we go. The wedding ring quilt with a circle. Then there's a block that's called flying geese. Does that look like a geese flying to you? Well, if you can imagine, out here, there are the geese that fly. Now, here's a secret for you guys that weren't sitting in my class. Out here in Colorado, in the fall and the winter, and now the geese are flying away, but they honk, honk, honk. It's so beautiful to hear them flying. You hear them honking, but you know, you look out the window and then they fly in the shape of a V. So all these geese, God helps them figure out how to get in that line, and it helps break the wind, and then they change over. But that's why this is called flying goose, because it represents that V formation that they fly in. So that one my mom made, but I wanted to show you a quilt that I'm working on. And I take a pattern. Sometimes I make it more complicated, and then I don't finish it because it gets so complicated. But let's see. So this is a quilt that I'm working on. So when we make a quilt, sometimes we have a pattern. And I got this pattern, and look at, there's a cabin. That's why I liked it. But sometimes I wanted to change some of the things out. So let's look at what this quilt looks like right now. Doesn't look like much. Kind of. It's colorful, but this isn't going to keep me warm at night. But I wanted to show you some of the blocks. Look at this one. It's Christmas colors. This one is called the log cabin block. Do you know why? Our little cabin is like Lincoln logs. So when I was a kid, there was toys called Lincoln logs, and you would put these logs together and make them notch, and you could build them up and build all different shapes. But that's what our cabin was like. It was actually built with logs from trees, and they were notched and then they stacked together, and it was on a foundation. So that's what this is. This is like the red is usually the heart of the home, because it's like the fireplace that's warm and cozy. So I like to put the red in the center, and then this is the log cabin. Then this one is called a 9-patch. Do you know why? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Then there's something called a 4-patch. It would look like that. Kind of. Let's see if we can make that look like that. Look like a 4-patch. And then there's some that are called 16 patches. So they can get all different sizes. And then look at this one. They can be different sizes. So this is the flying geese. See that shape of the triangle? And fun, fun Christmas colors. That's a big flying geese. Nope, that's the little one. This is the big one. What am I talking about? Here we go. 2 different sizes of different colors. So those are going to go in there. Then this block is called the prairie braid. Do you guys like to braid things? This is the prairie braid. Love Christmas colors. All right, what else do we have? And then I do something called applique. So remember the deer that I was stitching on, and then the deer came around the tree? This is a Santa. So this is one of the ones that I switched out. This is from a different pattern, but look at, I stitched him on, and this is called a yo-yo. Do you guys play with yo-yos? Does this look like the shape of a yo-yo? It feels funny. So that's one of them, but I like birds. So that's that one. And then this one is still getting worked on, but look at, does that look like a broom? Does that look like a wooden broom? So that's just to show you about quilts. So how quilts can tell stories, how quilts can hold memories, how quilts can be collected, all different colors, all different styles. Some are thick and warm and cozy, and some are very nice and light for summertime. Some are Christmas, and some are not. So, was that fun? I would love to hear what your favorite quilt was. So I asked the kids, what was your favorite quilt? And they told me which one it was and why. So I would love to know, for you fun friends that are watching me, what was your favorite quilt? And does it remind you of something from your childhood? So that's my presentation. And I've had those quilts sitting there for months because I knew it would be hard to get my head into being silly and talking like I was talking with the kids there. So I hope you enjoyed it. And I wanted to share with you, as I always close out my videos, with a little bit about what I'm going through in life and how I take that with how I walk through life with my Jesus and how he helps me through the challenges. One of the challenges, because I'm log cabin stitcher, but after next week, we will no longer own a log cabin, which is a good thing. It's a good part of our life because that part of our story, I keep talking like I'm talking to little kids. That part of our story, and I'm not going to cry, but that part of our story is over now. That was when we lived in California. And now we live in Colorado, and I'm looking out right now and I see hillsides and they're beautiful. So life is good out here, but we don't have to own a cabin in the mountains because we can just take a drive and go up to the mountains and enjoy them. So that part of our life is over, but I still have those treasured memories. And sometimes they make me sad. And sometimes they bring me joy because I know we love being out here. So that's been part of the story of that. And then always negotiating and all the stuff that goes with closing a real estate deal can be up and down, up and down. So there's a book that I've been going through called Resilient by John Eldridge. And I've talked to you about the app called The Pause. But the book that I'm going through is audio. And there was a part, I got a journal to go with it when I was living at the cabin. And then I had packed it away, and then I just found it the other night when I woke up at 4 o'clock in the morning worrying about something. So I just thought I'd get up and I started cleaning and I found this journal. Then there was something very good in it, and it was so good that I wrote it down on this little card, and I have it to remind me. I have this memorized because I keep asking myself this all the time, but this is a thought. Consider a challenging situation that you are presently encountering. So that was the one of being able to walk through the sale of the cabin gracefully. Then it says, how can you surrender to God's will and trust him in the midst of it? So it was taking quite a while, and we just had to surrender it to God and know that if he wanted this to close with these buyers, that he would take care of that. And so there was one night we were worrying, and I reminded my husband, God is faithful. He will take care of us, and he will help this to close if this is his will. And so we just let it go. And it is so good to know that even though hard times come, God is faithful. And I look at my life from when I was a child, and I know that God has walked through with me all these times. So even when they're challenging, he's with me. So Riley is sitting at an area up on the landing where he can look out and see things going on. There's probably deer out front that he's barking at. So there's that thought. There's the barking dog that did not get eaten by a mountain lion. And he is enjoying life out here in Colorado as well. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I hope that was fun for you. And I will be back with you. And now I can put all these quilts away and not have this stack in front of all my fabric. All right. God bless you guys.